Hello everyone, and welcome to my YNR Daily Spoiler channel. Jill tells Billy and Sally that they have to kill Kane the Young and the Restless. This is shocking news. No mercy, no murder, the young and the restless. Jill tells Kane something shocking. Billy and Sally are in danger. The Abbott estate was like a lighthouse on a hill. It was safe from the storms that rage below, but open to the light of Genoa City. The banquet for Jill was supposed to be a comforting event, with speeches, benefactors, and old friends who talked about being kind and generous. But when Jill Abbott announced her retirement, the room felt like a violin when someone presses too hard on a string. Billy Abbott looked at the crowd from the entrance, as if it were a stage he couldn't trust. He had married Sally Spectra in a messy, beautiful moment of promise. They were both old enough to have seen each other's worst moments, and young enough for the glow to hurt in the bright lights. Billy had a private life that he valued like a rare coin, a business to run, and legal problems to deal with. Tonight was supposed to be about Jill's and Jabot's legacies, not secrets that could tear families apart. Jill, a woman who had mastered the art of being calm, walked across the room at her own pace. When she got up to the lectern, people stood up straight. She smiled calmly and rehearsed, then put down the paper and did something unexpected. She folded her hands, turned to face everyone, and said, "There is something I have carried for years." To me, it seemed like she was protecting herself. I learned that it wasn't true. Silence fell like velvet. The cameras tilted as the donors leaned forward. Sally's hand squeezed Billy's as though to confirm his presence. Jill looked at him. "This is for you as much as anyone," she whispered to Billy. The room tilted, and he felt it. "I found documents that demonstrate a cover-up," Jill added, her voice calm despite the lingering tremor of aging. Someone we trusted in Newman Chancellor philanthropic circles was far more dangerous than we knew, as evidenced by a campaign of meticulous deletion from records to contributors and concealed within those files. There was a murmur. Both Diana's and Victor's names lingered in the room like shadows. Jill hasn't yet named anyone, though. She reached into her purse and took out a thin folder. "When I discovered this, I made every effort to shield others. I believed that keeping things quiet and avoiding scandal was the safest course of action. However, secrets deteriorate. I'll share what I discovered tonight." The papers shimmered beneath the chandelier like shattered glass as she opened the folder. These records linked Kane Ashby to financial embezzlement and a 5-year-old accident that claimed a young man's life but was disregarded at the time. I'm not a judge. I'm not on the jury. However, I owe it to the truth. The room shook. Sally's gasp sounded like the sound of a tiny animal. Billy's heart pounded. Suddenly, phrases that tasted like poison were used to describe Kane, the endearing figure who had once entered Newman's life and upended it with his convoluted loyalties. Kane had a smile that could open doors. Later, Jill approached Billy and Sally directly amid the commotion of hushed phone conversations and sudden exits. She said, "I'm so sorry. I held on to this for too long." With a broken voice, Sally questioned, "Why didn't you go to the police?" Jill appeared to be a woman who had given that question 1,000 private answers. "Because I lacked the chain of custody," she explained. The files were concealed. The records were cleaned by someone. I looked for evidence, but what I discovered simply made the cover-up worse. I thought I could construct a case gradually. People had perished by the time I realized how risky it was. I ought to have taken action sooner. Sally had burning eyes. "Is anyone else aware?" Jill said, "Just a handful." However, the documents are authentic. It's also worse than embezzlement. There is a connection to a hit and run. The file disappeared, witness statements were changed, and a donor's daughter was buried. "Before I tell the DA, I want you to know the truth." Billy tightened his jaw. "Kane." In his mouth, the name fell off. Jill gave a nod. "Kane." Sally looked like she had been punched. She needed Billy's safety like air because she loved him. She tightened her grip on him and gave Jill a startled look. "He can't get away with it if this is true," Sally said. Genoa City thrived on the chaos that ensued after the gala. Social media feeds fanned the flames, and reporters detected a story. Billy and Sally drove home in a car that seemed to go on forever, with the city lights outside acting as a scoreboard. The pair got into a heated disagreement in private. Billy was furious and raw when he stated, "We have to go to the police. We need to move quickly because Jill wants to take this to the DA. Kane has tremendous friends." Sally paced, "Given everything with the Newman Abbott wars, the police will disregard us if they believe we are acting in retaliation. We require evidence. We need a lead that they can't ignore." Billy yelled, "You think about destroying someone," with a hint of old Billy's rage. "Platitudes are not something we have time for." Sally's expression stiffened. She responded, "I'm not talking about murder," and there was a hint of winter in her voice. "We must ensure that Kane is unable to conceal the truth. That could entail uncovering information that people wish to keep hidden. We must outsmart his allies." He took hold of her shoulders. "Sally, if you're discussing anything unlawful." "I'm not," she angrily declared. "However, I will not allow him to deceive us. If he lies or does something else to silence us, we will expose him and he will be punished. We must use the truth to corner him." They came to a morally dubious agreement. There would be no violence. In order to prevent power structures from suppressing the truth, they would collect evidence, obtain independent forensics, speak with witnesses who had been suppressed, and compile a public record. Instead of becoming murderers, they would become hunters. They started by confronting Kane in public, applying pressure rather than making accusations. Kane loved to joke about his kind of luck at Crimson Lights, the cafe where Sally set up a rendezvous. With his charisma like lacquer, he arrived holding a piece of paper. People were still willing to believe him. Warmly, Kane remarked, "Billy, Sally, what brings you?" "Memory," Billy firmly retorted. "We just came to have a conversation." Sally left the question hanging. Kane's grin wavered. He had good reason to be cautious. However, he was Kane, skilled at handling crises. Between their remarks, there was a hint of tension. Kane's jokes didn't work. He provided answers regarding previous financial transactions, including loans, business gaps, and the financial tricks families occasionally used to preserve their reputations. A new type of mistrust burned in Billy's eyes. It wasn't corporate chess, but a feeling that even those chess moves had been fatal. That evening, Kane walked out of the cafe with his hands in his pockets, and suspicion hanging over him like a shadow. They had a recording of him dodging the answer, weaving stories like thread, but they had not received a confession. Later on, that tiny bit of avoidance would matter. Their inquiry grew in scope. At the DA's office, Sally called an old friend who owed her a favor. Billy retrieved bills and personnel records using his contacts. Holden Rhodes, a quiet detective who moved like a man who could piece a case together, received a locked file from years ago from Jill. Holden dug. He had a lead. 5 years prior, a mechanic in a strip mall outside of Genoa City had performed auto repairs and received payment in cash in a manner that raised suspicions. The mechanic recalled seeing a certain headlamp pattern, a front bumper with a scrape, and a video at a petrol station that no one had considered saving because it seemed unimportant at the time. Billy's stomach dropped when they saw the tape, which was blurry and only covered a small period of time. Although the footage was blurry, Holden used enhancement to identify a hooded figure whose head slant matched Kane's former profile at a particular angle. Not evidence, however, a breadcrumb. Witnesses who had been coerced into silence were interviewed. A mechanic still had a crossed-out invoice. A donor's driver recalled being paid to dispose of an anonymous male, and a bar waitress remembered a man who drove a particular automobile and limped. The threads wove themselves into a guilt-smelling design. Billy became darker. Anger is a hazardous ally, a furnace that has the power to burn or purify. One question kept coming back to him. Why had Jill kept this a secret? Why hadn't she called the cops right away? Although Jill's explanation, the fragility of the chain of custody and the fear of a cover-up, made logic, it did not calm his rage. Sally occasionally felt the old devil she'd survived with him flare as she watched him, the desire for vengeance. One evening, she whispered to him, "I promised you I wouldn't be the kind of woman who chooses the easy cruelty." I prefer that we handle this properly and ensure that he doesn't harm anyone in the future. Billy gave a faint, weary nod. I am aware. The culmination of weeks of work was a crucial moment. After Holden gave them a packet with enhanced video, sworn statements, and a money trail showing odd transactions between a consultant connected to Kane and a shadow entity, the DA's office, which had earlier been hesitant, consented to launch a preliminary review. Victor Newman, who was mostly involved in the backdrop of this controversy, observed the events with the same methodical appetite that he had for chess. He expressed his desire for a comprehensive probe through legal procedures, but did not take any public action. That indicated he wanted the truth, not that he wanted Kane destroyed. Kane was summoned to be questioned. There was a thinning of pretense in the questioning chamber. Sally held Billy's hand as he sat in the hallway. Their faces had the hue of those on the verge of death. With his signature swagger, Kane walked into the room. He responded to inquiries with a cautious demeanor of a man who has mastered deflection. However, he was unable to hide the way his eyes flashed when the DA's investigator put the shaky video on the table and pointed to transactions connected to his account. The investigator questioned, "You've been using third-party accounts?" Kane clenched his jaw. He remarked, "I had to protect some people. If they understood how money traveled, some donors might withdraw their support. I believed that I could prevent things from falling apart." The investigator bluntly stated, "Mr. Ashby, people died. An accident has been reported. A young man." Statements from witnesses were inconsistent. To quiet, money flowed. That evening, you were close to the scene. Kane's face turned white. This was the kitchen where he was unable to maintain control. After swallowing, he glanced down at the evidence and then towards the door where Sally and Billy were seated. Those who were close to him witnessed panic shatter the mask for the first time. "We must verify the chain of custody," Kane stated. "There's a liar." After that, the DA's office proceeded swiftly. The enhanced video, the mechanics logs, and bank documents were subpoenaed. The media leaned in. Like a tunnel, Kane's world grew smaller. The DA declared they had probable cause to file charges during the pretrial hearing. It was a pressure cooker. Billy, Jill, and Sally were seated near enough to touch. To get here, weeks of late nights and shaky partnerships were required. They discovered that justice is difficult to achieve, unequal, and occasionally compromised. Investigators pledged to look into any more criminal ties they discovered after Kane was detained on counts ranging from embezzlement to obstruction of justice. He called it a slander and publicly refuted it. Opinions erupted throughout the city. Some claimed justice had finally closed a loop, while others supported him as a scapegoat created by industry crossfire. After the hearing, Billy and Sally watched Kane's car leave in a police caravan while standing on the courthouse steps. At that time, the world seemed cleaner and smaller. They had reached the brink, thought about the animal impulses that gnaw at a person in grief and rage, and opted for a route that held the authority of the law rather than the abyss. "We did the right thing," Sally replied, leaning against Billy. Despite the strain on his face, he responded, "I think we did. However, the price. It has been carried by Jill. We lost everything because she was honest." At that moment, Jill, who was older but more composed, moved forward to grasp their hands. "The only mercy left was the truth," she declared. "We could have been more patient. We could have decided to exact revenge. However, we went with proof. In court, proof will be upheld." The ensuing trial was chaotic and open to the public. Testimony broke up. Kane's accusers kept to their thread of papers and testimony, while his defenders accused him of political scheming. The jury ultimately reached a decision on counts that demonstrated the strength of the case. While not all of the allegations made in the headlines would be proven beyond a reasonable doubt, the pattern of corruption and meddling was not overlooked. Kane was found guilty of embezzlement and obstruction related to the foundation finances. The court's decision made it clear that money could not permanently bury a life, even while the hit-and-run case remained open pending more forensic investigation. Billy and Sally discovered in the aftermath that healing wounds was more important for survival in Genoa City than winning. They were on the verge of choosing the dark route that offers instant satisfaction, But they ultimately decided to follow the law rather than exact revenge. They lost sleep and their innocence as a result of the decision, and they had to develop in ways that made them aggressive and cautious. "We almost lost ourselves to rage," Sally whispered as she stood one evening on the Abbott lawn. "But we found something else, each other," Billy murmured, putting his arm around her. "And we discovered the truth." Jill wondered if the lies had finally had their day as she gazed out over the city from her peaceful living room, which smelt like lemon polish and old light. She was the one who had kept a secret for far too long, acknowledging it had been both a death and a rebirth. Kane had nothing but the echo of his decisions in a cell that smelt like bleach and terror. The record on a bank statement or a witness statement made under oath could not be reversed by charm or power. Ultimately, the weak and flawed law tried its best. Genoa City went on, but not before two individuals came dangerously close to crossing a boundary they had sworn never to cross. The lesson of the story, which Jill, Billy, and Sally went through with their hearts raw and hands muddy, was not that justice always prevails, but rather that truth has a way of finding its tight corridors, and that sometimes the most courageous thing to do is to choose the difficult right.
Hey everyone, thanks for watching my video. Jill reveals a shocking secret. Please subscribe.